Hi, thank you for joining me on another episode of the Tech Exec Podcast, where I'll help you create teams worth leading, because life's too short to lead mediocre teams. As always, I'm your host, Aviv Ben-Yosef, coach and consultant to tech execs worldwide, and today our subject is starting from scratch. If you're getting this in the video version and not just the audio version, you can see that I'm in a new office. We've moved to Rome a bit more than a week ago. We're off on an adventure. We're embarking on this sort of new episode in our lives for a few years with the kids before they get too old for us to try something like this. And as part of that, as you can see, I'm in a new office. I haven't got anything set up really. I just put my two books there. I hope that the sound is good. I know that the lighting isn't great. I'm sorry about that. I hope that by the time I record, the next one's going to be better. But I prefer to have a new episode than to have nothing for you guys this week and break my 6-year streak over here. So here I am recording a new episode. And again, the subject is starting from scratch. And as you can see, I'm starting from scratch. We've been having, for the first time in, I think, 9 years, to set up a new apartment, something we haven't done, again, in 9 years. And also, the last time we did that, we did not start entirely from scratch because we moved with a lot of our stuff. And yeah, we did move with some of our stuff here, but we essentially only moved with the bare essential clothes, and I brought my favorite wine opener or stuff like that. We started with an empty kitchen. We started with empty cupboards. We had to start with linen and everything from scratch. And there's something very special about that, because all of a sudden I have to think about everything. While I was used to reaching for that specific tool or that pot or that pair of shoes for specific things, now I need to rethink whether I actually needed those, whether they were the right thing for the job, the best tool for the job. Maybe I can choose something else now that I'm starting from scratch. Maybe I can take a whole different approach and not even have the need to do that. All sorts of stuff like that. It makes me find new ways of doing things. It makes me appreciate my old ways of doing things, etc. Starting from scratch really forces you to look at things differently. This reminds me a bit, if you've ever participated at a code retreat, it reminds me of that, where by installing constraints on how we do basic programming, like you cannot use conditionals, you cannot use for loops. When you had those sorts of constraints forced upon you, all of a sudden you were forced to look at things all over again as if you were a beginner. You could not do things automatically. You could not just do it on autopilot, knowing exactly what you want to do. Therefore, all of a sudden, you kept noticing a whole bunch of new details, new ways of doing things. And this is the same for us right now as a family here, because everything is new. You look around and, I don't know, even the light switches look different. Even the way the people greet you in the hall is different. I'm just talking about the language. I'm talking about the culture. Everything around is new. We're starting from scratch, and we actually are seeing how some of the things make us really appreciate what we do really well, where we came from, and how being different sometimes can be better or can be not better or worse, just another good way of doing things. And that is about creating that sort of flexibility, elasticity, and knowing that we can be as robust as possible for a person going through changes that aren't traumatic, hopefully, but that are things of our own choosing. Now, if you're thinking how this relates to you, I've been telling a lot of people in the past few months that sometimes it is good to start from scratch, at least initially as a thought experiment, when they're looking at how to do things, how to approach the organization. You ended up in an organization that looks in a certain way. Maybe you were there from the beginning and you took part in shaping it. Maybe you inherited an organization, doesn't matter. But your organization now is the way it is. And you might be limiting yourself too much when you're thinking about the little deltas, the easiest changes you can do in order to improve things. Be it, okay, maybe I can move that person from here to there. Maybe we can change a bit the responsibility of that team. But what I often find very useful is the start from scratch thought experiment. I say, hold it entirely. Let's assume you now started with, you're getting a new box of Legos and you're going to be building up the organization from scratch. You're going to have, let's say, roughly the same budget. What would you do? What would the ideal organization look like? Which people would you hire? How would the teams look like? Start from that. Putting all the constraints of reality aside for a minute, have that suspension of disbelief. And when you do that, you can then see what really is the ideal scenario and more easily contrast that with what you have right now. When you're starting just from what you have today and looking at the little incremental changes you can make, that can often make us think too small. But when you start with a grand vision, even if you're never going to get there, but you know how things should look like ideally, and you start moving up there, knowing where you want to get, you will make greater passes toward that. You will make more progress and faster. So sometimes starting from scratch can really unlock how you look at things, help you understand where you can make progress, and also where things are working really well. If I have this experiment, if I think about the ideal state and one of the teams is going to remain exactly as it is, I know that's a bright spot. I know that's one of our strengths. That's something that I really value. If it's already ideal as far as I'm concerned, and I can try to double down on that. Why did that team succeed so much? Can we replicate that somehow to other teams? What are they doing differently that the others cannot do or haven't done yet? Having this realization, again, can really help us appreciate the things we already have. And as we have all learned, I hope, watching The Princess Bride enough, it's very critical to list everything among our assets. If you can tell that that team is doing well, you better know that. You better appreciate that and double down on that so you can more easily replicate what you've already done well. I always tell my clients, whenever I see a win, whenever I see a bright spot, my instinct is to reach out, grab it, and try to have more of that, because having that specific private case of success is proof enough that we can do that. We can do things well. Why not have more of those? When you start from scratch, you can very easily spot those areas that are your bright spots and start moving to replicate those, make them grow, make them more common across the organization. And you can spot the areas where you're like, oh, hell no, I'm never gonna do that. Had I known in advance, we never would have ended up with an organization that looks like that, or with that person, with that sort of management style, with that process, whatever it is. If you have those, you can start telling yourself, what will I do in the next quarter to make steps toward that future I want to get there, and not just limit yourself to, again, the baby steps that you can see ahead of you, because that might be too myopic, looking too nearsightedly. And I want you to look far, far ahead into the horizon and say, I want to get us there. That's the organization I want to have. How am I getting there? That's it for this week. Thank you for joining me. I hope the sound and everything is fine. Let me know if you have any comments. My email's in the show notes. And again, if you haven't checked out, please check out Unplugged with Aviv, where you can get at least one monthly live session with me with a lot of questions and some extra goodies almost every month. We have the one scheduled for July in a bit more than a week from today, so you can still grab that and attend live. And it helps us a bit with a very costly move, so it's really appreciated. Thank you. I'll see you here next week. Ciao.